Happy Hearts Day and welcome to the Tundra Homestead. This was the home base for our initial playthrough of the Anniversary Edition since it was the first new house we found and is the perfect place to kick off our tour of the Spiced Wines of Skyrim as recorded in the Elder Scrolls Cookbook. San's Spiced Wine is by far the most recognizable and the only one available in-game, but the cookbook provides us with two other recipes, Snowberry Cordial, a stiffer Nordic brew, and Imperial Mulled Wine, a relatively new libation concocted by an anonymous Imperial garrison cook with access to ingredients from south of the Jerall Mountains. We're actually going to start things off with the Snowberry Cordial because apparently this easy-to-make cordial has become a staple of hospitality among Nords, as it is commonly offered to guests and family in small glasses as a welcome warming nip and in bottles as a gift. So, to welcome you to our Nordic homestead on the Whiterun Tundra and to this video, it seems fitting to make this one first. We'll need a bottle of inexpensive red wine, which I picked up at the local Trader Joe's, Bellathor's General Goods. 1 cup water, definitely pulled from the White River just down the hill. 2 cups of sugar, not the moon variety. 12 ounces of whole fresh cranberries to represent the snowberries. Unfortunately, cranberries are currently out of season, so we'll be using frozen fresh cranberries. Honestly, they might be more accurate with a layer of frost around them anyways. In-game, snowberries are dependably located in and around Dawnstar, the new location of the Dark Brotherhood once that questline is completed. A 1/4 cup of dried rose hips for some rich, earthy florality, 1 cinnamon stick, and 1.5 cups brandy. Colovian or Cyrodiilic though. Dealer's choice, I guess. We'll do some of this cheap Armagnac called Saint Vivant, which I consider a loose parallel to Colovian brandy. I'll explain more in a future video. In a large pot, combine the wine, water, sugar, cranberries, rose hips, and cinnamon stick. Increase the heat to medium-high and cook until the cranberries start popping. Remove from heat and roughly mash the berries with a potato masher. Cover the pot and allow to sit at room temperature for about 24 hours. Strain out the berries and cinnamon stick, then add the brandy. Store in airtight bottles for up to several months. Serve in small glasses. And here we have it, the Snowberry Cordial. Right away, because the brandy is added once everything's cooled down and the alcohol has a tendency to evaporate even if we covered it, the first thing on the nose that you're gonna get is brandy. Luckily, that Armagnac, I think, works really well here. I think it's got a level of sweetness that I think some cognacs I've had might not be able to match. But the second thing is that really intense cranberry nose. I had so much cranberry left over from that strain that I'm just gonna have like cranberry preserves now for a bit. I'm missing a little bit of the rose hip, which is surprising given that there was a 1/4 cup of rose hips in it, but who knows? Maybe it'll be on the palate, not so much on the nose. It's good. It's very syrupy. It's so sweet. That is just an ooey gooey monster.
Can I try this one?
Oh yeah, that's like it's like the syrup that you put on your waffles.
Yeah.
Whoa! It is like at the same time so boozy and so sweet. Like this actually would probably be good on waffles or pancakes. It's like drinking syrup. What is this?
I definitely pick up on the rose hips and that earthiness and tobacco-iness on the finish, but there's so much sugar in it that it drowns out a lot of the other stuff. I think the rose hip and brandy work really well together, and the cranberry adds a level and depth of bittersweetness that works. It is just interesting to me that a cordial like this would be associated with a group of people who are so averse to anything not perceived as strong, insofar as they will call anyone that they deem weak a milk drinker. It's just weird that their culture would now be like,
"You dumb little milk drinker. Here, have this little cup of juice."
like, It's an odd association, but I still like it. It's fun. The cookbook also has a tip to try a splash of this cordial in lemonade during warmer seasons, so we'll give that a shot. I'll make one right now with an elderflower lemonade that I got that I think could use also an extra little splash of lemon juice in it. So give me a second to whip that up, and we'll have Autumn try it and see what she thinks.
Try that one.
Ooh, I love this one. It's so good. Holy cow. I love it. This is my favorite drink.
The cookbook also says that the Snowberry Cordial pairs well with rich fruit cake and evenings by the fire. I don't have any fruit cake, but we do have a fire right there, so let's have a seat, see how that goes. That was nice. Anyways, now that we've wet our whistles with an apparent staple of Nordic hospitality that is suspiciously absent from the game itself, let's make our way over to Solitude to sample the most famous wine of our tasting, San's Spiced Wine.
Need a ride?
Welcome to the Solitude Marketplace. Evette San has graciously permitted us to use her booth to showcase her famous concoction.
A secret family recipe. The only good thing my father Octave ever did.
You should speak to my daughter, Evette. She's the brains of the family.
In fact, it's so good, no one else in Skyrim even tries to make any.
Although the exact recipe for San's spiced wine remains a closely guarded secret, a more unscrupulous adventurer can find the list of spices in the logs of the East Empire Trading Company. And if you happen to be out on a chilly evening to see the burning of King Olaf in Solitude, it'll put a little fire in your veins. Luckily, if you haven't completed the Dark Brotherhood quest, Bound Until Death, in which you may or may not interrupt a wedding by creatively murdering the bride and the Emperor's cousin, during her wedding ceremony, Vittoria Vici will be working at the East Empire Company and withholding a shipment of said spices from Evette San, prompting this request from Evette upon meeting her for the first time.
You wouldn't have a few minutes to run down to the docks, would you? I've got a shipment of spices the East Empire Company is holding up. I need someone to convince them to release it. Get back to me when you're done and I'll give you something for your time.
You can make your way down to the docks to fulfill Evette's request, where Vittoria is currently daydreaming about her upcoming wedding, and will let you know that there is a tariff holding things up.
Sorry, I was lost in thought. I'm planning my wedding, you see. So many details to work out.
Evette San asked me to check on her shipment of spices.
Ah, yes. If she wants to pay the 2,000 gold tariff, then we'll be all set.
You can choose to either pay the tariff in full, outright bribe Vittoria, or persuade her to send the spices up to the city anyways.
Evette can't afford a tariff. She can barely afford her stand.
I suppose I could make an exception. I do like her spiced wine. Fine. Tell Evette San her shipment will be brought up to Solitude shortly.
Either way, we're just gonna take a look at those logs to discern the necessary spices. Oh yep, right here.
Thank you so much. I swear it's a fight with them every shipment. Here's something for your troubles.
Now that we've got the spices figured out and on the way back up to Evette, let's see about making a batch for the upcoming Fire Festival, provided you've completed the Bard's College questline for it. No, not that Fire Festival. That Fire Festival. We'll need a 750 milliliter bottle of red wine to get us started. I was going to use one I had on hand, but then I spotted this bottle with a straw base that looked suspiciously like the in-game model for San's spiced wine. So for authenticity's sake, we'll be using Bellagio Chianti, Alto wine, since that's the unspiced wine available at her stall, right here. 2 cinnamon sticks, 1/4 teaspoon ground cardamom, 1 teaspoon crushed juniper berries, 1 inch fresh ginger peeled and sliced thin, a pinch of ground pepper, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, 2 shots of brandy, and 1 shot of port. Combine all ingredients except the brandy and port in a large saucepan over medium-low heat and bring up to just under a simmer. Keep at this heat for about 15 minutes until the sugar has dissolved and the mixture smells fragrant. Remove from heat and let sit overnight at room temperature, covered, or for at least 12 hours. Apparently, it pairs well with festival hand pies, a dish I don't have time to make today, but if you really want me to get my binging with Babish on sometime, I suppose I could be convinced to make a video about the recommended food pairings. Now that it's been 12 hours, add the brandy and port, then strain into clean bottles. Enjoy warm or at room temperature. And there you have it. San's Spiced Wine, with a label that definitely doesn't look like I just drew it within like 30 seconds before I realized I needed to have a label for the bottle. Let's have a taste and chat about it, shall we? The juniper is not hiding, it's not shy, which I really love for those of you that know me from my Velods Mead video. I'm a big fan of juniper, so it's nice to see that come back into fashion here. I also think that the cardamom is lending just a really clean earthiness, which I know sounds kind of oxymoronic, but that's like the only way I can describe it. It's really awesome. And there's like a hint of the ginger on the nose, but it's not overwhelming. It's pleasant. It didn't have enough time to get as punchy as it does with the Nord mead, or anything that involves using ginger for a prolonged period of time, like a month in a brewing process or something like that. Honestly, on the palate, the juniper almost expresses almost like a blueberry. I really like that. There's just an undercurrent of cinnamon. It's not too intense. It's very mild, but still giving it just enough of a kick to be noticeable and welcome. Also, the combination of the brown sugar and the port gives it this rich sweetness that it's not candy sweet, but it's got a lot of depth. I really dig it. I think the brandy also helps with that. It is really fantastic, and I think that in that bottle it looks perfect. Try this.
Wow, that was a lot of things. Is this the one with juniper in it? Mm-hmm. It's very red wine and then gin-y at the end. And then it's pretty bitter. I don't know if I love it or I hate it. It's really cool.
So, now that we've gotten a taste of Skyrim's most famous spiced wine, let's talk about the final spiced wine of the cookbook, Imperial Mulled Wine. Many Imperials have found Skyrim's climate difficult to bear, so when one enterprising garrison cook whipped up this hot drink to help ward off the northern chill, it quickly gained popularity across the region and beyond. It makes use of a few Imperial ingredients that must be imported, but its warming qualities are well worth the extra expense. The identity of our unnamed enterprising garrison cook intrigues me. At first, I thought it might be Agnes, the cranky old cook at Fort Greymore.
You fighter types are always underfoot. You want me to clean? Then scat!
But I don't think it's her. She's actually a Nord, so the cold wouldn't really bother her, and she doesn't seem the type to care about whether the people in the fort with her are cold either.
I swear you people are an odd bunch. Please, just step aside that I may return to my duties.
Also, she seems to only have allegiance to the location itself, and as such will serve whoever is currently occupying the fort, be they Imperials, Stormcloaks, or your run-of-the-mill bandits.
Your political affairs are your own, but any allegiance you may have in the ongoing war could very well affect your access to Fort Greymore.
Because of this, my headcanon is that this beverage's creator is none other than Chef Gianna of Castle Dour, who surely would have been promoted to the castle from her garrison due to the beverage's popularity and her enthusiasm for cooking in general, but unfortunately no longer has the time to prepare the famed libation. Oddly, like Vittoria, both Gianna and Agnes die during the course of the Dark Brotherhood. I'm starting to sense a theme here. Let's just take a walk up to Castle Dour to prepare this final spiced wine. but there's actually an invisible table here that nobody knows about. So, you're welcome. Anyways, before we make this recipe, we need to put a few seasonings together to make what the Elder Scrolls Cookbook calls Imperial Seasoning. It is a combination of 3 parts each of marjoram and savory, 1 part coriander, and a 1/4 part white pepper that needs to be ground. Now that we've prepared the Imperial Seasoning, the Imperial Mulled Wine calls for 1 teaspoon Imperial Seasoning, 1 cinnamon stick, 1 bay leaf, 1 tablespoon sugar, or more for taste. We're gonna go with 1 tablespoon because not much of a sweet tooth. And 2.5 cups of white wine. I don't see a lot of mulled white wines, so this is fun. Before we get started, there was actually another wine mentioned in-game that I initially thought would be a spiced wine and was disappointed to not see it in the cookbook, namely Firebrand wine. You can find a case of it at the Blue Palace for Gulamai, a fence for stolen goods, who also happens to work at the East Empire Trading Company with Vittoria Vici.
Well, now that you mention it, there is something I've been trying to get my hands on. I have a buyer looking for a case of Firebrand wine. There just so happens to be a single case in the Blue Palace. Bring it to me, and we'll talk about Golden Glow Estate. Ah, I see you have the wine. Hand it over, and we'll talk. Can't have the buyer getting impatient and looking elsewhere for this, can we?
It's interesting, but individual bottles are not actually available without using console commands, despite being referenced elsewhere in-game. However, after getting over my initial disappointment of its exclusion from the cookbook, thinking on the subject, it isn't strictly described as spicy, so the Firebrand portion of the name could be a family, clan, or winery name rather than a description of flavor. Luckily, I just so happened to find a real-world winery by the name of Firebrand. As such, we'll be using their Chardonnay for this particular recipe. To extend the Gianna headcanon further, I'll suggest that perhaps Gianna is Gulamai's client looking for a case of Firebrand wine to restart her enterprising endeavors and offer Imperial Mulled Wine as a competitor to San's Spiced Wine here in Solitude.
No one else in Skyrim even tries to make any.
Too bad before she can do so, she'll be seen as an accomplice to the imposter gourmet that poisoned the imposter emperor, whoever did that, and is quickly killed by his Penitus Oculatus before she can even defend herself. Either way, it's the simplest recipe of the bunch, steeps for the shortest amount of time, and requires no time to cool to room temperature, which also means that it doesn't have time for alcohol to evaporate and require a spike of additional alcohol like on the other 2 recipes. Because it only calls for 2.5 cups, I've got enough left over to sip some regular Firebrand wine while I prepare the rest of the recipe.
Combine all ingredients in a small pot over medium heat. Bring the wine up to just under a simmer so it is steaming but not bubbling. Keep it there for around 10 minutes to allow the flavors to combine, then strain into clean heat-proof glasses. This recipe can be scaled up easily depending on how many soldiers you need to keep warm, and securing the spices in a tea strainer can also help keep the drink clear. I did not do that.
And there you have it, the Imperial Mulled Wine. At this point it's cooled down a little bit, but it's still above room temperature, it's still warm. So right away, on the nose, it's incredibly savory. All of those spices in the Imperial seasoning mix are savory spices, plus the addition of the bay leaf makes for a very savory beverage. Like, even the addition of white sugar and cinnamon doesn't quite make this, like, you know, super sweet or cinnamon spiced, because the cinnamon stick's only in there for 10 minutes, so it doesn't have enough time, in my opinion, to like draw out enough cinnamon characteristic. So what you're left with is a lot of really savory spices, which, again, it's interesting getting a white wine that's mulled at all, but then also to have a white wine that is mulled with savory spices. It does create a spice cabinet smell. That savoriness plays very well with the sugar, I will say. There's like a hint of the cinnamon, but because the Imperial seasoning is ground, it ends up creating something that's a little bit more cloudy than the promotional image in the cookbook. It's almost like if you were to make a white wine chicken broth, but you didn't put any chicken stock in it or anything like that. It's the same seasonings, all white wine, a little bit of sugar. It's sort of what you get. So it's interesting because it pushes my brain into like a soup dimension, but then it's like sweet and recognizably a spiced wine. So it's not spicy. It is just mulled, rich, savory. I do like the savory spice. I had never had it before this, so I think it's a welcome addition. Very much like a milder version of rosemary. It's definitely interesting. And while it could be a competitor to San's spiced wine, they're completely different categories. They're trying to do very different things. So if you like one, you might not like the other. If this one is too savory and not spicy enough, then you're gonna lean San's direction. And if neither of them are sweet enough, then you're gonna lean towards the cordial. I'm glad I was able to find Firebrand wine. This is a very buttery Chardonnay. I like it. Just a hint of oak influence, which lends itself to the savory nature of this mulled wine. If you wanted something that was like chicken broth minus the chicken that could get you drunk, that's sort of what this is. So the cookbook also says that this pairs well with stewed apple and Idar cheese, which is another dish I don't have the time to make. Sharp cheese and dried meats. Anyways.
Okay, try this.
It's like chicken broth. Like if chicken broth and white wine had a baby.
And there you have it. All 3 spiced wines from the Elder Scrolls Cookbook. The Snowberry Cordial is certainly the stiffest of the 3, matching the Nord's more abrasive natures. The Imperial Mulled Wine is more mellow, matching the Imperial's affinity for caution and diplomacy, and San's Spiced Wine is right in the middle in terms of both spice and strength, representing a harmonic melding of Solitude's influences from both Nordic and Imperial cultures. It's also interesting to observe how the length and intensity of heat reduce the alcohol content of the wine over time, leading to the cordial's 1.5 cups of brandy added after cooling. The San's recipe requiring 2 shots of brandy and 1 shot of port, and then the Imperial Mulled Wine not needing anything as it is served immediately. Also, despite Firebrand wine's exclusion from the cookbook, I'm happy to have been able to find a satisfying real-world equivalent. I'll be testing more of their wines soon for an upcoming recipe inspired by the only Argonian mixologists I know. Subscribe to see that video in the spring. The cookbook includes suggested pairings for each of the beverages. I did not have the time to make those, but I figured I'd offer you something. I think that this Merlot and brandy cheese from Costco goes well with these 2, given that they're both red wine and brandy based spiced wines. For the Imperial Mulled Wine, a little bit of smoked salmon and crackers, because I think that that's fitting for the Solitude coastline and a white wine pairing. Yeah. That all works very well together. This wine has kind of cooled off a little bit by now, so. Whether you're looking to share one of these recipes with a special someone this Valentine's Day, or just want to treat yourself, I hope you try making one of these at home, and if you do, please let me know how yours turns out in the comments. If you want to tune in for some Bard's College shenanigans tomorrow, we have a randomly generated character that is a chaotic good Khajiit battle mage bard who is looking for love. So we'll do some quests tomorrow with that character over on Quench Quest, my gaming channel. Subscribe if that sounds fun. Anyways, tap here for my take on the Blackbriar mead recipe, and tap here for the first stream that we did the Bard's College quests in.
The Bard's College is here, in the main office of the East Empire Company.
When the snow sets in, even the hardiest Nord needs some spiced wine to warm the blood.